start off on the right foot, cup of tea, clean work area. Hello, welcome back to the channel. This is the second part of the Speedmaster restoration, and in this episode we're going to look at fitting the Harley wheel to the Speedmaster. So stick with me and let's start off on the right foot, and that's with a clean work area and a cup of tea. Now the way this rubbish Harley tool works is you have an insert that goes into the bearing and tells you what size bearing each one of these inserts are for. See, it's got a slit in the back and you've got this spreader. What you do is you put the spacer into the bearing, spin the wheel over, and then you put this through, and then you hammer that into there to spread these sides. Once you've done that, you have that supported underneath obviously, but then when you've done that, you move it to a spot where it's not supported underneath, you tap this and it's supposed to drag the bearing down. They're crap, they always slip, takes you forever to do. Now on a normal vehicle with a spacer in the wheel, what they would do is they would just cut little grooves in the end of each of the tube, each end of the spacer tube, and then you can just get a bar in onto the back of the bearing and tap the bearing out properly. That's a modification that I'll do on this, so in future if I do have to change the bearings, which I should never have to do, these last a very long time, these bearings, but if I do have to change them in the future, I won't have to use this stupid piece of crap that Harley thinks is a tool. Okay, now I find the easiest way to use this tool is with one of these stands. So what you can do is you can shift it over so you're smacking in the bearing grip part of the tool. Now you do have to be a little bit careful. I've cracked these in half before, so just until you feel you've got a good enough grip so it's not actually going to come out, and you'll find it'll centralize itself. Then as you can see, this is the problem with the tool, it just slips. So it's actually started to move the bearing now, so we did get a little bit of movement in the bearing, and then you're left with this. So you just keep doing the same process. So keep on putting it into the bearing from the back side, put it onto the wood, go into the bearing tool, a few hard taps, okay, now you can see this time has actually worked. So as much as it's a crappy tool, it does actually do the job. And now from that, this spacer will determine which spacer you use out of the kit. Now what you might find, the smallest spacer in the kit is too long. So you've got two choices. You can either just cut this down a little bit, or you can make an aluminium piece to go around the outside of this if you've got a lathe. So I'll most likely cut it down. It's one way to get the bearing off the tool. Now of course, once you've got that tube and bearing out, you no longer need to use that tool. You can now go just with a drift straight into the back of that bearing. Brass drift where I can, and that way it doesn't damage the surface of the bearing. And there she goes. Now we're not going to use all the parts of the wheel kit. There's some of these parts are specifically for the Harley ABS, but the reason we get this kit, as I'll show you later, is it comes with the internal spacers. Now we need the internal spacers because in the wheel with the smaller bearings, they're going to have a smaller internal spacer, so you need to change that as well. It also comes with a spare spacer, and the reason why we need that is because we may have to get some new spacers made. These Speedmaster spacers are not likely to fit the Harley wheel. If they do fit, great, but if not, we've also got the spare spacer that we can then cut down to the right size to space up the wheel. The bearings themselves, they're just 25mm internal diameter bearings. So let's open one of them up. And pig's ear opening that up. Now, as you can see, it's the same outside diameter on almost all of the Harley bearings. What changes is the inside diameter. So even though this wheel is fitted with a smaller inside diameter, the outside is still the same. When we get the Speedmaster axle bolt, see, it's a perfect fit. So it's the right bearing to use for this wheel to go on a Speedmaster. Now, as well as all these parts, okay, so have a good look in there. It's nice and clean, there's no damage, there's no corrosion. Now what you want to do is you want to figure out which side is going to be on the brake disc side. So in this one, we look at the tyre tread's going to go that way to push the water outwards. So this side is the right side, the left hand side, which is the brake disc side, and that's the one you're going to put the bigger of the two new bearings in. So you can see the two new bearings are smaller in diameter than the ones we took out. So these are for the newer models with the 25mm axle. So we put the bigger one into this side and the smaller one into the other side. Now what you can do with these to make the job a little bit easier is you can put these in the freezer and leave them overnight. If you put them in the freezer, leave them overnight, they're going to get a little bit smaller, and then when they go in here, they'll tap in really easily. But these tap in quite easy anyway, so it's not really too much of a worry. So what we do is we just grab our old bearing that we took out and use that to seat it in without whacking yourself in the thumb. You can see that's going in. You just chase it round to get your high spots. So the reason they give you a whole host of new spacers is because these bearings are for heaps of different wheels. So for some wide wheels you need the much bigger spacer, then the smaller spacer is for the narrow wheel, which is what we're putting on here. Okay, so that one, you can hear the tone change when it seats. So now that bearing's seated in quite nicely. And when we get our tube, you can see how that's sitting proud. So the bearing's going to seat all the way down onto this. So that bearing's too high. Now what will happen, I mean really it's not such a big deal. You could just smack that in and then just have it resting, the inner resting on there. It's not going to cause you any problems, but it's not a neat way to do things. So either take this down or make a spacer for it, just to make it nice and neat. And then the outer and inner should sit on the spacer and the tube at the same time. So you don't want, the worst thing that can happen is if your outer hits first, because what's going to happen when you tighten your wheel nut is there's going to be pressure pushing this bearing in out of line with this outer ring, so you don't want that. So I mean, it's probably better just putting that straight in, and then there's nothing stopping that outer ring. So when you tighten your bolt, it'll tighten on the inner ring, and the outer will spin in here. So for the purpose of this job, I'm actually going to make a spacer for it, because I actually like the bearings to be looking the same on both sides. So you want it to look similar to that, so it doesn't look like it's too far in. And also, if you do that, when you're measuring your bushes for your spacers for your axle, then they should be the same size either side. Whereas if we were to turn this down and then push this bearing in further, then you'll need a longer one for this side. So that's my plan, to try and find a piece of aluminium. I'll make myself a nice little spacer ring to go in there, which is going to seat against that at the same time as that seats against there. Okay, so I just got finished. I ended up just turning up a bit of neoprene for it. Now, I don't tend to show me using a lathe because I know I'm not really great at using a lathe, and I've got some bad habits, so I don't want to be passing those on to you guys. So if you haven't got a lathe, then get a metal drop saw, and then you can just cut this to size and have the bearing go further in. But for now, that's perfect for what I need. And then the narrow bearing can be hammered into place. So again, we do that with our old bearing. Now these bearings, you don't have to grease them. They're all greased inside. They're not serviceable like roller bearings are. Okay, so just bear in mind, if you do use that method, it's going to end up flush on this side, just a little bit in on that side. If you don't like that, then just keep turning down that bush inside that until you get the same distance on this side of the bearing lip. But for now, I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm just going to go with that. Okay, so it's now time to crack out the specialist tools. So digital mic, the other side, the rim of the wheel to the flat part of the mudguard holder there. On one side is 35.23 millimeters, and on this side same, exactly the same. So we've got 35.2 millimeters either side on the rim. Now when you do that, just turn your wheel slightly, because it could, if your wheel isn't straight, you measure it at one point, it could tell you you're all okay, but it's actually not, because the wheel isn't straight. But this wheel's dead straight. It's measured the same right the way through. So 35.2 on either side at this point, and that's with this spacer, the original size of this spacer on this side. The one on here is going to need to be turned down. So again, we just put that spacer in, make sure it's tight up against the wheel, make sure this is still correct. Yep. And now we want to measure the distance that that bearing is in from this face here, which will give us the width we have to turn down the other bearing to. It's a little bit difficult because you can't really get in there with this very well. So you got to really just try and do what you can. Take the spike through, so you can see that's hitting the bearing surface there. That's on line. Give that, just make sure that's absolutely on line. So that gives us 21 millimeters. Now it will tighten up a little bit, so we might, we'll go to 21 millimeters first, and then we might have to just take a tiny little bit more off. So we'll lock this in at 21 millimeters, and then I'll go to the lathe and we'll cut down the other one to that 21 millimeters. So I'll mark it up first, just make it a bit easier, and then we'll just start taking it down until we hit that 21 millimeters. So I ended up buying a 1/2 inch rear pulley spacer is what I ended up buying, and then I've just turned it down, and I've turned it down to 9 millimeters. So on your bike it might be slightly different, so just make sure you measure up to see how thick you need the spacer for the disc. That's worked out good at 9 millimeters. Also, what you need to do is just make sure you get the right one. There's two inside sizes for Harley discs. So that's a smaller inside for the Harley discs, and that's a larger inside diameter. And it's important because this ridge is what holds your disc in the correct location. So don't use a small one. If you try and use a small one, it'll fit on there okay, but then when you come to put your brake disc on, it'll just float. So it won't be held in the right position, and that could move even though it's bolted up. So don't use the wrong one. Make sure you get the right one. So again, for me, that was a rear pulley spacer, 1/2 inch, turned down to 9mm. So when you put this on, just make sure it's nice and tight on that rim. And your disc should sit just right on it. Now, you need to use longer bolts. I don't have the right bolts at the moment with the larger head there on order. I'm just going to use these for now, because these can be changed once it's all built up, and it's not going to cause me any issues. But make sure you put slightly longer bolts in to make sure you've got enough thread going into the actual hub itself. So that's the spacer fitted under the disc. You can see, and you look in here, you can see the gap either side, just so you can be confident that it's actually in the right place. So those gaps need to be the same either side, and that's it. So that's your Harley wheel on a Triumph Speedmaster. See you next episode.